If you're going, okay, if you're going to be taking one of the native plant courses, or maybe go on day hikes, this program today will help you to appreciate plants even more. So with that said, the most wonderful quote in the world, I just absolutely love it. Ralph Waldo Emerson, he lived obviously a long time ago, but one of his very long poems, he included the phrase, "the earth laughs in flowers." And I just think that's absolutely gorgeous. I wish I had written that myself, but it was Ralph Waldo Emerson. So let's go ahead and we'll proceed through the slides a bit here. All right, so some of the things we're going to be discussing today are why plants are important. Oh, excuse me, just a second. I need to put on my headphones and you'll hear me better. One moment. I should have done that right at the start. Okay. All right, now let's see if we are connected. I'm not sure. Can you hear me better? Yeah, I'm not sure that this is connected yet. It does not seem to be.
We can hear you pretty good.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
All right, okay. I guess we'll just go ahead without that, and then I'll try to go back to it later on if I can. All right, so we're going to talk today about why plants are important, basic parts of plants, types of plants and how they evolved, why plants produce cones or flowers, and ways to identify plants and how they're named. So there's a huge subject matter, but we're going to try and break it down at least somewhat simplistically. So what good are plants? I mean, this is kind of a silly question in a way, because one of the reasons that you're here this morning is because you enjoy plants, right? But a lot of times we take plants for granted. So either close your eyes or just imagine the world without plants. And a lot of times down in the city, we don't have a tremendous number of plants. So say if you go to New York City, I don't think there are too many plants there until you get to Central Park. But just imagine the world without plants, no trees, no flowers. And then consider the question, could plants survive without us? And could we survive without plants? So that leads into what we're going to talk about. What do plants do for us? So the Earth is about 4.6 billion years old, according to the current science. Primitive life began in the oceans 3.6 billion years ago. Non-vascular plants, and vascular just means that they have tubes and they have roots that go into the ground, so they're anchored. So non-vascular plants, these are the ones without roots. They just float. They don't have the stability. But the simple non-vascular plants, they began about 400 million years ago. Ferns and fern allies began 350 million years ago. Gymnosperms, which we're going to talk about quite a bit, they're like the conifers, the trees with cones. They began around 250 to 300 million years ago. Angiosperms that we're going to talk about the most, those are the flowering plants. They began around 100 to 150 million years ago. And all of these numbers are so big, they're hard to keep in perspective. But if you look at this bottom line, it kind of helps you. Modern humans, all of us, we've only been on Earth for a mere 200,000 years, which tells you that we haven't, excuse me, we have not been here very long. Obviously, the plants have come before us. And now let's look at the next thing. We're going to look at just some very basic arrangements of plants. I know that most of you know all of this already, but we'll just go through a very quick review here. So if you take a plant up here on the left of your screen, and we're looking at plant parts, this happens to be a tomato, this one that we have here. But you have the structures, you have the roots that anchor the plant in the ground. They gather water from the ground, and they also gather a lot of nutrients. And then those elements go up. Whoops, I moved it. They go up into the plant structures, and up through the stem and up into the leaves and the flowers and the fruits. So the leaves, the green of plants, most of the plants, at least to our eyes, they look green. We see colors differently than the bugs and the birds, and even cats and dogs and other animals see color. But we see this vibrant green. The reason it's green is because that's chlorophyll. And chlorophyll interacts, you've all heard way back in high school, you've all heard about the whole process of chlorophyll. We'll have a little bit of a slide on that in a moment. But the leaves gather, they do photosynthesis, so they gather energy from the sun, but they also have little stomata usually on the bottom of the leaf that actually breathe. The plants take in oxygen. I'm sorry, excuse me, I had that all. They take in carbon dioxide and put out oxygen. So plants are a very, very important portion of why there is life on Earth is because there is oxygen, which we of course need, and all of the other creatures in the world also need that oxygen. So the plants are what provide that for us. And then plants they flower, and this again is the flower of a tomato, which I'm sure most of you guys have grown tomatoes. So there's the flower, and then if the flower is fertilized by pollinators, usually it's bees, but it varies. So if they're pollinated, then it turns into a fertilized seed, and you get fruit. So those are the very basic elements of plants, and this goes for this is an angiosperm plant, which we'll explain in a moment here in another couple of slides. So the roots anchor and support, the stems support secondary stems and branches, and the leaves manufacture sugars of the photosynthesis. So the leaves and all of this, the stems and the roots, also they move water and nutrients. If you've all looked at a leaf close up, and you see veins in those leaves, and there's movement in there. There's water and nutrients move in those veins. So a lot of things are going around in plants. The one problem that plants have, the majority of plants, is that they can't move. They are anchored by their roots. So they have various adaptations to reproduce themselves and for their seeds to move around. All right, so this is just a little representation of photosynthesis. And I'm sure you guys remember photosynthesis from, again, as I say, from high school or possibly college classes. But the current science does say that photoplankton, the tiny ocean plants, produce 70% of the oxygen in the Earth's surface, while the plants in soil produce about 28 to 30%. And that makes further sense when you think that the Earth has so much water on the surface. So that's part of the reason that the photoplankton are so it contributes so much to the amount of oxygen that's made. So the oxygen in our air is generally about 21%. The rest of what we're breathing in there's nitrogen, and there's just a lot of different elements. So photosynthesis anyway is very, very important. It's something that we humans can't do. So it's very obvious that if we didn't have plants, then we would be in a world of trouble. So, all right, so now that's just a very, very quick view of the importance of plants. But so when you go out and hike, or when you look at things in your garden, you're looking at flowers, shrubs, or trees, and what do you see? You're taking in color, shape, size, location, and that's a good start, but there's more. So generally, when you walk, this is a little wildflower, but when you're walking, say in the foothills close to Denver, you'll see these little flowers. And you think, oh, that's a really cute little flower. There's some blue, there's some pink there. What else? Well, the first thing to do is to look close, to bring them up and to look really, really close at these plants. Usually that's going to take getting down on your knees anyway, or possibly even lower to the plant to have a really good look at it. That's number one, so that you can really see the leaves. Look at this vein this is on the bottom side of the leaf, is very, very prominent. You're seeing the leaf shape. It's lance shape, right? It's like a small, almost not an arrow shape down here, but like an arrow shape at this portion of it. And the flowers themselves, when you look really close, they're even cuter than if you look at them from a distance. So always get close. That's your first thing you want to do. So now we've looked at this one close. We see the leaves that are this narrow shape here. It's called a lance-shaped leaf. We look at these cute little bell-shaped flowers. What we can see here are three different basically ruffles down at the end. If you look at it straight up, if you could take this bell and look at it up, you would see five of these. So there's actually 5 petals. They're fused together into a bell. But let's have a look at this. And in just a second, we are going to talk about what these are. But so when you look at this little flower and you look at these over here, the flowers look very similar, don't they? You would say that they could be at least in the same family. But what is going to tell you that they're different? And it would be the leaf, of course. Well, 2 things. Around this one, it looks fairly dry, doesn't it? There's a little bit of grass here. There's some dried leaves from previous seasons, but it doesn't look really wet. There's not a whole lot of foliage there. Whereas you look at this one and it's really green. So there's a lot of things there. But then you drill down and you look at the leaf. This one we already said was lance shaped. This leaf over here, for one thing, it looks a little bit thinner, doesn't it? And it's oval. So right there, this tells you that these 2 plants could be related, but they're different. And the actual flowers themselves, the common name is the same. It's chiming bells, which is a really cute name. And there's actually, let's comment about common names. There's nothing at all the matter with common names. It's just that they're very common and they're very widespread. So in other words, you can go to the East Coast and actually there are plants that look very similar to this. They are in the same family of plants, but they have the specifics are different. The species are different. So the problem with common names is that they can apply to various plants. So it doesn't give you enough specificity. So that's the situation. So what we have here, and we'll go back to that in a moment, but this is about these 2 plants. What we have here is the same family and we have the same genus, but we have a different species. So they're very related. It's just like the Smith family has maybe 4 kids and they look similar, but they also have some differences. So it's the family, the genus is the same, but then the specifics are the Smith kids are different species. So the family that we have here is borage. What we're talking about now in terms of scientific naming is it's generally botanical Latin. There's a little bit of Greek in there as well, but it's essentially botanical Latin. So Boraginaceae, Borage is our English term, but Boraginaceae is the botanical Latin. So ACA is always in the end of a family name. So that's the family. The genus is Mertensia, and the species for this little one is Lanceolata. They're both borage family. This is Mertensia lanceolata. This is Mertensia ciliata. And so they're the same down to the species. And we'll see that in some other plants as well. But you can also see the other thing is, as we talked about before, this is in a drier area. And this one you'll find by a lot of times by water and also at a higher elevation. So you can tell just by looking at the leaf and the fact that these plants they're actually taller and bigger and there's more foliage, that they need more water. So these guys are a little bit tougher. You can see without even touching this leaf that it's a little sturdier than this leaf over here. This one's bigger, this one is sturdier. So it can do with a little bit less water. So those are some of the things you want to see when you look at plants, is where they're growing, how they're growing, are they near water, how delicate or tough they look. Those kinds of things help you. So with scientific plant names, you have Latin, and it's binomial. That's just a fancy term for two-part. A lot of terminology uses mono, which obviously means one, bi is two, and tri is three, and etc. So those things are connected to tell you how many parts there are. So how did we come to name things Latin, scientific, the botanical Latin? It's botanical Latin is, it's obviously it's not spoken. No one in the world speaks Latin anymore. I studied it in high school a long time ago, not botanical Latin though. And obviously I went to high school a very long time ago, so that's a whole different thing. But botanical Latin has been designated to name plants all over the world, so that there's a standardization. So you go to any country and you're going to find botanical Latin. Now people might pronounce it differently. In fact, some of the words that you come to are really tongue twisters. And so it doesn't matter precisely how you pronounce them. However, it's the same. It's the terminology is the same. If you go to Japan, this Mertensia lanceolata would still be Mertensia lanceolata there in Japan. They may or may not grow that particular one there. They probably don't, but they may have something that is in the same genus. Certainly they have things that are in the same family. So botanical Latin is the standard for scientific botanical terms. And this International Code of Botanical Nomenclature, ICBN, those are the big guys that they get together around every 5 to 7 years, and they decide if there are any scientific reasons to change or modify names. And we'll get to that in the moment, because some of the names have changed and there are reasons for that. But so in terms of the scientific names, we have family. That's a group of plants sharing common ancestors and DNA. They always end in ACA, ACE. And genus is a group of closely related plants. They have similar morphology, and morphology is form. And species are so alike that they're capable of exchanging genes and reproducing. This is a basic unit of scientific naming. It's down at the very bottom of all of the ideas that we have. So let's look we're going to talk a lot more about the whole, we're going to get into the kingdom of plants, but let's talk a little bit more about this idea of species and genus and family, because that's something that really, it makes sense when you get out there to look at plants, and it also helps you to figure out what the plants are. Once you know a little more about how plants are named, then you can look at plants. Now let's look at these three, and they all look very similar. I'm sure you guys can say right away, okay, these are columbines, right? This one, most of you, unless you're very new to Colorado, in fact, a lot of states have columbines anyway, but this one, the Rocky Mountain Blue Columbine, is our state flower. But when you look at these, they're obviously different, but they're related. So that is the family. So this family is the buttercup family, Ranunculaceae. And these are all in the same genus, which is Aquilegia. And then they have different species. So this one, our blue columbine, that I bet most of you have seen it growing in the wild. This is Aquilegia caerulea, and caerulea means blue. It's really nice when the species name actually tells you something about the plant. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it tells you about where it grows, the species name. This particular one tells you this is a blue plant. This one is Aquilegia elegantula. These grow more so, they're not common at all, really, but they grow in the western slope, and they're pretty much subalpine, or at least montane, so up in the a little bit higher elevations. And this one is Aquilegia chrysantha. So, and obviously it's yellow. You can get this one for your garden. Now let's talk about that just a touch here as well, because you can get columbines, and probably a lot of you have grown columbines that are different colors, maybe pink. Let's see, there are different shades of blue. There's some sort of a purple color as well. So then you get to talking about cultivars and hybrids. Now, for one thing, columbines, and if you're a gardener, you already know this, columbines are famous for hybridizing. Their seeds exchange. So in fact, these guys, these native ones do that as well. These are all three natives. But if you get these growing too close together in your garden, say, you're going to get a mix of the red one and the blue, and the same with these two. So that's one reason you want to grow columbines with a pretty good amount of space in between the different cultivars or species, unless you want them to mix. But you can get, for instance, if you go to the East Coast, this one again is Aquilegia elegantula. If you go to the East Coast, there is their native columbine. It's a red columbine, and it is Aquilegia. So it's the same family. It's still a buttercup, or Ranunculaceae, but it is Aquilegia canadensis, and that's a native in the East Coast. And as a matter of fact, when you go to the garden center, the Aquilegia canadensis is much more common to find, even here, than this one, our Colorado native red columbine. It's harder to grow, this one. You can find it in certain nurseries, but because the Eastern native is easier, I think, to cultivate, you can find that very easily. There's nothing the matter with growing it, except that you have to be aware that that's not the native. So if you want the native to Colorado, you have to specifically get Aquilegia elegantula. So, and there are a lot of different cultivars of this one, the Aquilegia chrysantha. And this one is a lovely, it's really a lovely garden plant. This one tends to spread, and you have a bit of a group of it. And Okay, I see that there are a lot of questions in the chat. Let's look and see what you guys are asking here. Okay. Yes, okay, I see here Wesley asks, should we infer that hybridization occurs at the species level? Yes, yes, it does. It occurs at the species level. The plants have to be similar enough that they can exchange seed material, and they can hybrid. The pollen has to be able to fit into another, into the female. So we'll get into those into that very specifics of how fertilization occurs. But yes, it does occur at the species level. All right. And yes, okay, this is an interesting question here too. Julie wants to know, we have them in your pastures, and they are called bluebells or harebells. There are some other plants that are native that are also called bluebells and harebells. So again, and they're just a little bit different. There's an awful lot of plants, a lot of our native plants, and a lot that you grow in your gardens as well, are bell-shaped. So calling them bluebells or harebells is fine, but it's just that that's where with your common names, you get, it can apply to several different plants. So yes, bluebells, usually chiming bells is the most common name I've heard of with the mertensia, but bluebells a lot of times refers to Campanula rotundifolia, which is very blue. It's a little bit bigger than the mertensias. Okay, let's see what else we have. Yeah, there are several harebells. So there's several campanulas. There are. So again, when you have campanula, we haven't talked about campanulas yet, but campanulas belong to a family. So the campanula itself there's Campanulaceae, but there's also Campanula is a genus, and then the species. So the species is going to vary. You can get different campanulas for your garden, and you can get natives as well. All right. So yes, mountain harebells and bluebells, that's again, it's where you get into a little bit of difference because people have different common names. And we all use common names when we teach these courses out in the field. We put in common names. A lot of times there are 3 or 4 different common names for a plant. And again, there's nothing wrong with it, but to be very specific is why we go to the scientific name. Okay, all right, let's see. So, all right, so let's go ahead. If I missed anything, I'm sorry. All right, let's get out there. So again, we're going by the family, genus, and species. So every plant has a botanical name. So the plants that I've listed here are not native to Colorado, but a lot of us either grow them or you've certainly seen them. So the lilac, the common lilac, is Syringa vulgaris. It's in the Oleaceae family. It's actually originally from Japan, but obviously, as we know, they grow in a lot of different places. Tomato is Lycopersicon esculentum. It's in the nightshade family, the Solanaceae family. So if that's one takeaway from today, you can ask your neighbor, are you growing any Lycopersicums this year? And they'll look at you kind of funny, but that is the scientific name. So daffodil is Narcissus jonquilla, and that's in the Amarilla, sorry, Amaryllidaceae family. Lettuce is Latuca sativa, and that's in the Asteraceae, the sunflower family. Surprisingly enough, there are a lot of different lettuces. There are actually some they're very weedy. but they are native to here. And then some, of course, are cultivated. Usually when they get something like lettuce that you buy at the grocery store, it's a plant that has been hybridized and changed. The varieties have changed through different manipulations by plant propagators to make a certain plant that tastes good, that has good longevity in terms of shipping to all our grocery stores. But so that one would be, it would still be in this family. Any lettuce you find at the grocery stores still in the sunflower family, Asteraceae, and it would still be a Latuca, but the species would be different. And when you buy your plants at your nursery centers, you'll have a lot of times the plant will say, for instance, if it would be this one, it would say Latuca sativa, and then VAR, variety, and then it would have a certain variety name for it. So it just refers to one of the native lettuces. So marigolds, this is one of the marigolds. This would be a native one. They are also in the sunflower family. They are originally, I believe, from Mexico, certainly from very warm and dry climates. Pear trees, we know they're not native to here. We try to grow them, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but they're in the rose family. And the rose family is really enormous. We'll hit on that a little bit more so on Thursday when we talk about plant families. So a pea is Pisum sativum, and that's in the pea family, Fabaceae. So, all right, so let's keep going here. So the animal kingdom, kingdom, of course, includes us. It includes our furry friends. So humans, we are in the animal kingdom. We are hominidae. You can see the tongue twisting that comes up. Once you say a bunch of these botanical Latin names, your tongue starts to kind of do funny things with them. But this is our family. This is our genus. Homo is our genus. Sapien is our species. And so dogs are Canis lupus familiaris, and their family is Canidae. Cats' family is Felidae, and their genus is Felis, and then Catus is their species. So mosquitoes, bumblebees, everything has a binomial two-part name. So let's go ahead here, and then let's talk about, whoops, I don't know why it went back. Okay, let's talk about kingdoms. So we just mentioned the animal kingdom. So obviously what we're more interested for this is the plant kingdom. This is a simplified version of the plant kingdom. There are a few more classifications that I haven't put on here. But the main thing about the plant kingdom that we're interested in is the class. So this is vascular land plants. So again, plants that have stems where water goes up and down, nutrients go up and down, they have roots. And then there are three things under that, the ferns and fern allies. They reproduce by spores, which is much more primitive. They are still here, but the ferns and fern allies started before anything else. And they are, one of the reasons that we can tell that is their reproduction strategy is much more primitive. So it's spores. And gymnosperms then are a little more complex. Gymnosperms are the conifers, the ponderosas, all of the so-called evergreen trees. They reproduce by naked seeds. So they have seeds. This is an elevation where they're now reproducing with seeds, but the seeds are in cones. So you've all seen, like, for instance, at least a ponderosa cone, and all of the different species have different cones. So the seeds are somewhat protected, but they're not covered. They're open inside the cones. And we'll talk a little bit more about that coming up. But the majority of plants now are angiosperms, and that means covered seed. This word, angiosperm, means covered seed. So they reproduce by covered seeds, and the majority of them have a flower that we can see and relate to. And we're going to talk much more about what flowers are and why they are and all that sort of thing. But the angiosperms includes herbaceous plants, which just is plants that basically die back in winter, whether they're annuals or whether they're perennials. They have soft stems, so they don't stay around all season. And woody plants. So our big trees are any big tree that's not a conifer, that have the bigger leaves. Those are angiosperms. They do flower. Some of them have big flowers. A lot of them have little tiny flowers. Right now you see the crab apples are in bloom. And also, if you get out to hike right now, the wild plums are out, and that is the best scent in the world. It's so sweet. They've just started blooming, so try and get out to see those. But anyway, your trees, your cottonwood trees, that's an angiosperm. They have little tiny flowers, but they do flower, so they are angiosperms. So then you also have subclass, the monocots and dicots. They're actually, they call them now eudicots. That only is in the angiosperm group, and that's changing a little bit with some of the science, and we're going to talk about that in a touch too. We've already talked about the family, the genus, and the species. Family shares basic characteristics like all of our different columbines or the mertensias. Genus is more closely related. Species is the most similar, and that's not capitalized when you write those. It's not capitalized. So, all right, from an evolutionary standpoint, let's go back to these classes. The ferns and fern allies, that is more primitive. They just produce these sori, which have spore inside of them. So this particular picture, I think I took in probably, it was a very moist climate. I think it was probably Vancouver or Vancouver Island. But we do have some ferns in Colorado, not nearly as many because of course it's not as humid here. But on the underside of ferns, when they're in a reproductive state, you will have these little brown dots, which are sori, and they have the spores in there. So the spores fall to the ground, and they can produce another plant if the conditions are right. So, and obviously this one is very ready, and it has lots and lots of spores. So these started around 350 million years ago, roughly. Then we have gymnosperms. These are the naked seed plants. This is a ponderosa pine. I know you guys know this plant. Unfortunately, I do not have a picture here of the cone. When I teach this in person, I give everybody cones to look at, but I know you guys know what a ponderosa pine cone is. What I'd like for you to do is to make a note next time you're out somewhere. Maybe you have some in your own yard, but next time you're out hiking, specifically look for a pine cone, pick one up and look at it. So the pine cones, the ones that belong to the ponderosa pine, they have, and you probably already have known this because I'm sure at some point in your life you've picked them up, handled them, maybe made a wreath or something. But the cones have little brown pieces on them. They're called bracts, and they have a sharp point on each one. So that serves the purpose of keeping people from chewing on them. Not people, I'm sorry, not people, I meant animals from chewing on them. But inside that bract, or just covered, or not covered, but protected by the bract, is the seed. So it's open. The other thing that's really interesting here about both of these, both the ferns that we just talked about, and these guys, the gymnosperms. So they started around 250 to 300 million years ago. This was before we had most of the pollinators, for one thing. So these, how would you think that, and these they have female and male seeds. I'm going to show you pictures of that in a moment, but how would the pollen, the male portion is pollen, how would that get into the female cone if there are no pollinators? What do you think? How about wind? They are wind pollinated. So, and the other thing about this is especially if you've lived in the hills or the foothills, you have seen your car turn yellow in the spring, and that is the pollen. There's tons and tons of pollen that come from a forest of ponderosas. And when the wind blows, this pollen disperses, and so it goes all over the place, but it also goes reproductively, it goes into the female cone. So this is a Douglas fir, which is in the Pinaceae family. The genus is Pseudostuga and species is Menziesii. So common name is a Douglas fir. And I'm sure you've probably seen the cones for a Douglas fir. On these guys, you can see these are the bracts, these little brown, sort of rounded things. And these are the seeds. So they're very naked. They're not even really all that protected. And they tend to stay on very frequently. So again, add this to, excuse me, to when you go out hiking, to look for a Douglas fir tree and look at the cones. Now these are the male cones. This is not to scale. This is about the size of a female cone here. They're bigger. The male cones are very small. And the reason is because their only purpose is to produce pollen in the spring. So they are about 3/4 of an inch long. They are produced on the same tree as the female cones, but they're only produced in the spring, and then they fall down. In fact, if you live somewhere where you have ponderosa pines and Douglas firs, you're going to have the used male cones are going to be blowing around because they just basically disperse. And you're going to have all these little pieces, say on your patio and things. That's one of the things that you sweep up because their purpose is done. The other thing that you notice about these two is that let's go back to this one for a second. The Douglas fir, as you know, has very long leaves. They're called needles, but they're actually leaves, and they're in little fascicles. That 2 or 3 in a group. So again, next time you go out, look closely. And the other one way, there's several ways you can tell the difference between a ponderosa and a Douglas fir. Douglas firs are soft, softer anyway, and they have very short and flat needles on them. So the other plant that you have that is also a gymnosperm, so it's naked seeds. This one is a little bit, these little guys here are called cones. They kind of look like a covered seed, but they're not. They're actually cones. So scientifically, they're classified as a naked seed. And I'm sure most of you have taken one of these cones at times and rubbed them, and there's a wonderful scent there. So this This particular one, this is a Cupressaceae. It's a juniper. This is a juniper tree. You also have junipers that are shrubs in the ground. So they would still be the same family, but they are a little bit different species. Some of them, a little bit different genus and a bit different species, but they're related. So the same family. So this is the female over here, and this is a male. These male trees in the spring, at a certain time in the spring, they look like they're sick, actually, because the male cones, there's so many of them on a healthy tree, and it looks, the whole tree looks like this. It's just covered with these little male cones. And again, it's wind dispersed. Now the female cones always last longer, and that makes sense because they're the ones, that's where the seed has to develop, and that they have the ovary on the female. So those are gymnosperms. Now we go to angiosperms. This is a tree that's an angiosperm, and I know you recognize this. This looks like a bean pod, doesn't it? And that's actually what it is. It is, this is a pea in the pea family, so it's a Fabaceae. The genus is Robinia, species is Neomexicana, and this is a locust, a type of locust. It's a deciduous tree. Deciduous just means that it loses its leaves in the fall. So the tree, the trunk and the stems obviously stay there. All the trees are just starting to wake up now, and they're budding. But this particular tree has a beautiful raceme of pea flowers, big, really actually pretty big flowers. And it's a tall tree. I have one in my, I wouldn't say garden, it's to the south of my house. And where I live, we have a lot of deer, and the deer like to eat on it. So it hasn't grown real tall, but these trees can get to, at least, whoops, they can get to at least 20 feet or more, probably 30 feet tall. So what we're going to talk about now, we're going to go through this one last time here, the major class divisions that we just looked at, the ferns and fern allies. So they are still around. What we do have quite a few of in Colorado are horsetails. And that is Equisetaceae, that's in the fern ally group. Those are reasonably common. They grow usually in a sort of a moist area, but as I say, they are quite common. But they do reproduce by spores, so they're very primitive. The horsetails, I do not have a picture of them in this presentation, but the horsetails were 20, 30 feet tall in ancient times, so Paleozoic era. In other words, around the time of the dinosaurs, the various times of the dinosaurs. These were very, very tall plants. And the ferns were actually very, very large too. Now, if you go over to the western slope of Colorado, in certain moister areas, you will see more ferns, but there are a few ferns here where it's dry, much drier, but not too many. You'll see little small ones. They're not nearly as common. The gymnosperms, so next evolutionary wise, they're still abundant. They were around when the dinosaurs were here. They have naked seeds. So it's an added development and a more sophisticated way to reproduce. And the angiosperms, now the most abundant plants, are about 80% of plants at least are angiosperms. And this is worldwide. They include deciduous trees, shrubs, herbaceous plants, and they reproduce by covered seeds. So if you have an apple, if you eat an apple, you are eating basically the seed, the structure that covers the seed, the reproductive seed. And we have made cultivars to make that fruit a bigger thing, so that is an edible situation. So the angiosperms have been around for about 100 to 150 million years ago. And remember, we've only been here 200,000 years. So we're newcomers. We've done an awful lot since we've been here, but we're pretty newcomers compared to all this. So, all right. So the main thing that we're going to talk about now is reproduction in flowers. So what is a flower? We all like flowers, right? We got up early to learn about flowers today. So a petunia is flower, rose is a flower. Many native plants have flowers. Bees and butterflies visit flowers. What about a honey locust tree? We just saw a Robinia neomexicana, which is a type of locust. But many of us have honey locust trees in our yards. That is, the flower is smaller, but they do produce, some of them, the females produce very large fruit. It looks like a gigantic bean pod. And they kind of get all over. So lawns, what about lawns? They actually, that's a plant, and they actually have flowers too. They're very tiny, but they do have plants. They do have flowers, excuse me. And so tomato plants, that way back when we were talking, when we first started, we were talking about the basics of a plant. That was a tomato plant. Obviously they do flower. And then if we're very lucky, they fruit and we get a lot of tomatoes to eat. So why does a plant go to the trouble of making flowers? I mean, do they have to make flowers in order to go to seed? Okay, let's look at one flower that I know you've all seen in one way or another, perhaps not a wild one, but you've seen this in botanic garden or possibly in your own garden, is the rose. So this is Rosa woodsii. So what we have here is Rosaceae is our family, Rosa is the genus, and woodsii is the species. So the common name for this one is Woods wild rose. And this one, you would think that it's Rosa woodsii. It means that it's a rose that grows in the woods. Unfortunately for this one, that's not true. Well, it grows in the forest. That much is true. But this one happens to be named after a botanist whose name was Wood. And so they honored him. He was one of the first ones to name it with a scientific botanical Latin name. So they've honored him by calling it Rosa woodsii. But what we see here, when you look at this plant, first of all, you're drawn to the flower, right? Which is great. But you also want to look at the leaves. It would be, in a perfect world, I think, all the rose family would have the same leaves, but they don't. They can be somewhat similar, and usually the arrangement is somewhat similar for the leaves, but they're not all the same. So not all rose family have the same leaves. These are oval, simple leaves. Look at that. The mid rib on the back, on the underside, is very prominent, and they're also they look like somebody took a pinking shears. They're also very, I can't even think of the term now, I'm sorry. They have the tooth edge. But when we get back to the flower, what do you see? You see it's really pretty, it's pink, okay. How many petals? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals, right? And then we're looking at all these guys here. There's a whole bunch of them, and then something in the middle. So what this is these are the stamen. This is the male reproductive parts, and we'll talk about those specifically in just a moment. But in the center is the female, the pistil, and there are a number of pistils as well, and then a whole bunch of stamen. This is one of the classic ways of identifying a rose family. even if you're not identifying the specific flower, is if you have 5 petals, many stamen, and then your females in the center, you can say this could very well be a rose. There are exceptions. There are always exceptions. So there are some rose family that look quite a bit different, but this is a classic rosaceae or rose family situation. So let's look at parts of a flower. When you, obviously this isn't a real flower, this is a drawing, but it's a lot easier to see here. You have, we start on the outside going in. So you have this little stem, it's called a peduncle. And by the way, let me say right away, we've already talked about a whole bunch of terms. No matter what you have spent your life working, if you've been a nurse, if you've been a doctor, if you've been a lawyer, if you worked in a grocery store, no matter where you work, there's a lot of terminology that's specific to your job. And it is very much the same in botany. There are a ton of different terms that some of them will be familiar to you and some a little bit less so. But the one thing I want to tell you right away is don't get bogged down with all of the terminology. For one thing, when you take a native plant course, there will be a lot of terminology mentioned and talked about. You do not have to know most of that for the test that comes at the end. But what happens is as you're looking at more and more plants, hiking more, just doing this close observation that you'll do of plants, some of this terminology will just kind of be internalized, and let that happen sort of organically, naturally, rather than stressing about learning every single thing. Now, having said that, these terms are some that you'll need to know just to understand a lot of the elements that you're going to be faced with when you're identifying plants. But this is your little stem, and it's another term for that is peduncle. This is a receptacle. Most plants have that. And then these green things, now here they show 4. They're actually on most, the majority of plants, probably about 80%, have 5 petals. There are a number of different petals that we're going to see as we go through things, but the majority have about 5 petals. But each one is called a sepal. Each one of these, 1 sepal, 2, there's 4 sepals that we can see here. All the sepals together make a calyx. And then we get the petals. So again, the majority of plants have 5 petals. Not all plants have petals, as we'll see as we go along. But what's really important is this right here. These are the reproductive parts. This particular drawing shows a plant that has a female portion and the male. This one has five male portions and 1 female. So the female is called the pistil. A carpel is another term. There's some distinguishing things, but I would just remember pistil. For our purposes, pistil and carpel can be synonymous. And then the male part, the whole thing, is called the stamen. That is not on here. That term should be on here. Okay. But the male part, the whole thing, is the stamen, S-T-A-M-E-N. And so let's start with the male. For one thing, there are usually more male portions than there are female on a plant. And the females in the middle, if there are both, the females in the middle, and then the males surround. So the female or the male stamen, S-T-A-M-E-N, is composed of an anther. It's right up here at the top. The anther produces the pollen, And then this is the filament that goes down and anchors into the base of the plant. So the way you can remember all this is the stamen, M-E-N, is the male, the overall male part. Anther is, if you think of it in terms of anthers for a deer, it's a male form. And this is female, again, it's got men in it, so filament. And then the female part is called the pistil, and the upper portion right here is the stigma, and then this tube is the style, and then this is the ovary chamber, and this is the ovule itself and the egg. Now, plants vary. Some of them have more than one ovary in there, and some of them just have one. It depends on the particular plant. But the stigma is generally a little bit sticky. Our fingers are not always tactile enough to feel it. If you have something like an Easter lily, those are a big enough flower that you can actually touch the stigma and you can feel the stickiness of it. And so the pollen falls onto the stigma and goes down the tube and fertilizes the egg. And then a fertilized egg will become a fertilized seed. And then when the flower when the flower is done with making seeds, then the petals fall off, right? They dry up and fall off. The male portions, the stamen, also dry and fall off. But this portion right here, the female portion, generally, and it depends on the particular plant, but this generally stays part of the seed. A lot of times this style will form part of the seed. It'll either be long or it'll be really short, but usually there's some portion of the style that is left, and we'll see that on part of the seed. So do we have, okay, I see we have a lot of questions. Let's look. Okay. The presentation is going to be unavailable. All right. Okay, the hybridization is at the species level. It can be at the genus level at times. Yeah, and thank you for asking that. I need to clarify. I'm so sorry. I was confusing when I answered that question. It can occur at the genus level. So if we go all the way back to the three Aquilegia, the columbines, those, if they hybridize, that would be at the genus level. Most plants, the most common way that plants they reproduce is at the species level. But when they hybridize, that's generally at the genus level. Okay, so I'm sorry, I messed that one up. Okay. Okay. Is anyone still having problems with sound? I don't know.
I don't think so.
If you keep, let's see, and everybody is off. Usually, if you keep your, don't have your picture on it. It kind of helps with the Wi-Fi, so it doesn't overload the Wi-Fi, I think. Okay, all right. And thank you, Lisa. Lisa Mason corrected that as well. Yeah. Yeah, yes, the genus for Juniperus, yeah, if I said differently, yes, the Juniperus is the genus for Rocky Mountain juniper. If I said differently, I misspoke. and I'm sorry, I can't go back, I don't remember exactly, but the Juniperus scopularum, Juniperus is the genus, Scopularum is the species. And for that one, Cupressaceae is the family for the Rocky Mountain juniper. So it's a different family than Ponderosa, which is Pinaceae. Okay. Okay, a locust. All right, so your locust, it may be a male locust, because some plants have male and female flowers on that on one tree, and sometimes there's a male tree and a female tree. One of the common trees that we have been we're trying to kind of cut down on the female is the cottonwood. The cottonwood tree, as you probably know, is one of our native plains trees, and it's related to the aspen in family. But when it produces seeds, then the seeds are cotton. It's why it's called cottonwood. They're the fluffy white stuff that gets all over the place. It gets on our gutters, and there's just a lot of it. It's a lot of it in the air. So that is a female tree. The male cottonwood does not produce the seed. It produces the pollen. So yes, sometimes a plant can have, and we'll talk about that's monoecious versus dioecious. We'll talk about that in a little more in a bit. Yeah, so that would be the reason that sometimes when you go to the nursery, if you want to have fruit on a tree, sometimes you need a male and a female specimen, and sometimes you don't. It varies. Okay, all right. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll go to, this is just another view of the reproductive portion. So it just gives you a little bit closer. This one does say stamen, yay, and the other one should have. But stamen is your male, is the name for your male reproductive structure. Anther is here, it produces the pollen. This is the filament that attaches. And the female is the stigma. So it's showing the pollen grain going here, and it goes all the way down and gets into the ovary, and you have a fertilized, if it goes right, you have a fertilized egg. So the female is the pistil, and it has the stigma, which is a little bit sticky, has the style, which goes down. It basically is a tube that goes down to the bottom, and then you have ovary or ovules. Okay, and again, you have the sepals that all together make a calyx. And this is one term that I think was not on our last one, is all the petals can be called the corolla. But the main thing that I'd like for you to take away is the idea that this one right here would be one good one for you to keep. The other thing is, if you have your Acker field, let me tell you what page that's on in the back. Because you have a diagram. You can also, if you don't have a diagram here and you don't want to copy all these, you can get it very easily on the internet. You can just look for a diagram of plants, and there'll be like a million, more than you've ever wanted to see. Okay, so page 782, if you have your Acker field, on page 782 is the parts of a flower, and they're all nicely labeled. They're all the basic labels. So this one will be referring to some ideas that come from this. So let's look at some actual flowers. This one is an Easter daisy, or Easter lily, excuse me. So this one is an Easter lily. This is the stigma. And if you've seen an Easter lily, these obviously are pretty large plants. They don't grow natively here. There are a lot of various lilies that grow here, but this one is really a good one to look at for plant parts. And this one, obviously, all the orange here is on the petals and all over here is the pollen. And this one is just absolutely bursting with pollen. It's everywhere. So in order for this plant to pollinate, in order for it to be fertilized, the pollen needs to get into the stigma, and then it goes down this style into the base of the plant where the ovary is. Now, an interesting thing here is look at where on this particular plant, the stamen are lower than the pistil, right? So what that means is you see pollen all over the place. It's like everywhere. In fact, when you buy a florist's lily, sometimes they'll remove the pollen. They'll remove the stamen because they get so messy. But this one, let's just say that this pollen is trying to get up here, and it's not as easy because it's lower, right? So some plants can self-pollinate, and the reason that the way that they self-pollinate is this pollen would get up here into the stigma. This plant is trying not to self-pollinate, and actually the majority of plants, well, they vary, but in order for diversity, they usually pollinate from a nearby plant so that they're exchanging a little bit different genetic material. I mean, it's the same plant, right? But they can self-pollinate. Most plants pretty much try not to. The other thing to know, though, is that some plants only have the male parts. They don't then, and a different plant will have the female part. If the plant has only the female part, that's called a pistillate plant. If they only have the male part, that's called a staminate plant. So let's look at these guys. This is a lovely, lovely little plant. Love the alpines. They're my favorites. Actually, they're everybody's favorites. Once you get to know them, they're just amazing. But this is a little alpine lily. The family is Liliaceae. The genus is Lloydia, and the species is Serratina. Now, a couple of things to notice on here is, first of all, how many petals do you have? Obviously, it's 6, right? And you also have 6 stamen. It's not always, but fairly often, you have the same number of stamen as you have petals. So this particular one, you do have your 6 stamen, and you also have the female right in the center. This is like a classic perfect plant. And by perfect, I don't mean that it's pretty, which it is, and it's cute, it also is, but it's perfect because in botanical terms, that means that it has both male and female parts on the same plant. So that makes it a perfect plant. So in that regard, an imperfect plant would be, or not complete plant, would be either a pistillate plant that has only females or a staminate plant that has only males. Now here's a garden type lily, not a but it's similar to the one we just saw. Here is this is the pistil, this is the stigma, and you can tell it's 4 parts here. So that would mean, that would generally indicate that you have 4 ovaries down in your 4 seeds. You're going to have 4 seeds down in your in the bottom in your ovary, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys, the stamen, and they're full of pollen. So, okay, let's keep going. I'm sure most of you have grown fuchsias. They are obviously not native, but I wanted to show you this because you can see the parts so very easily. So you have your female, and again, it's very long, just like our Easter daisy, and your males are up here. And there are 6 males. Actually, it looks like, almost looks like they're more. One, yeah, it looks like they're more than 6. There should be 6, I believe. I don't know what's quite going on here. But the interesting thing is, again, just like we talked about the Easter lily, it doesn't look like this plant probably wants to self-pollinate. The plants that self-pollinate usually have the female, the pistil is lower, so that the pollen can fall onto the stigma. Although this one, I mean, you could get some pollen on here, but more likely it's going to kind of be dispersed. And the pollinator, the bee or whatever pollinates right here, is going to get pollen on it, but isn't going to then go to the pistil. It might rub against it. So either way is possible. So let's look at these guys. This is Geum rossii. This is an alpine plant. This is actually one of the most common alpine plants. It's in the Rosaceae family, so it's a rose. Alpine avens is the common name. Rosaceae is the family. Geum is the genus, and rossii is the species. And I believe that one is named after Ross, who was a botanist. A lot of times when you have 2 I's at the end, that means that it was named in honor of the botanist who first saw it and claimed that name. Same thing over here with Lewisii. So what we have here, though, are the different plant parts. So let's look at these guys right here. These, we have 2 different things, actually. We have this and this. They're different sizes, aren't they? So these are, this is a bract. These right here are sepals, okay? So these are the sepals. When they're all closed, this one's closed. There are 5 of them. They're just starting to open. This one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? And these right here are basically like stipules or bracts. So they're part of the plant, but it's not part of the calyx. This here forms the calyx, all right? So the calyx, think of the calyx as like an egg. So like an eggshell, that the plant, the baby plant forms inside of that. And then when they open, like this one is opening, then you have your flower coming out. So I wanted to show you the various stages here. These are the bud stages. This is opening. This is the flower already opening, but we're looking at the bottom. And I think there's a picture coming on in a little bit that shows this open, the flower open, and there are many stamen. You can see up here many stamen, and there is a female in the center. So this one over here is blue flax. You've probably seen that one in your travels. You might even be growing it in your garden. This one is Linaceae for the family. Adenolinum is the genus, and Lewisii is the species. So this one, you have a whole bunch of flowers here, right? So this one is a whole bud. So this is the calyx. It's made up of the sepals. There's 5 sepals in this. Usually, not always, but usually you have the same number of sepals as you have petals. So in this case, that does apply. So these are just starting to open here, but this is like your little egg, if you will, and the plant is on this one too. The plant is forming in there. And then the plant is just coming out. This one is all the way out. And let's count the petals. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I think earlier on we mentioned that about 80% of plants, so the majority of plants have 5 petals. There are certainly exceptions, but you find an awful lot of 5-petaled flowers out there. So you have 5 petals. And again, as is reasonably common, you have the same number of stamens. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stamen. And then right in the center is your lady, the pistil. So you have the 5 stamen with this happens to be white pollen. The majority of pollen is yellow, but it can be black, it can be white, it can be brown, it can be different colors. And here's your one female. It looks like there are 3 parts in here that you can see 3 little dots. So the likelihood is that there's more than one seed in more than one over in the bottom. The other thing about the petal, look at this petal with all the lines on it. That can be called a nectar guide. It's sort of like it is like a landing pad. Like when you're in an airplane and you're landing, the pilot is looking for the runway. This is like a runway telling them, land here, come on down here. This yellow is another thing that is attracting the pollinators. The other thing that you have, I want to go back just for a moment to this. What you have and what is not shown on here is you have nectaries. So they're usually right down at the bottom here on the other side, on either side of your pistil. You have little round substances that make nectar. And nectar is generally what the pollinators are going to the plant for. Some of them, like a lot of the bees, do eat some of the pollen as well, and they get pollen on their body, it rubs on their body, but they generally go for nectar. So I wanted to show you where the nectaries are. So let's go back to that plant. So this is kind of another aiming thing. The lines bring the pollinator in, and then the yellow says, yeah, come on down here to the bottom. And they're basically going down here and they're finding a bit of nectar. Plants vary in terms of how much nectar they provide and whether or not they keep providing nectar, but most plants provide nectar. So let's go back to our Aqualegia for just a moment, and let's look at the front of it. And this happens to be a white one. There are white sports. They're not terribly uncommon that they're totally white. This is a native, and of course you can also get the white ones as a cultivar in your nursery. But this would still be called Aqualegia cerulea. It's just a white sport. There's a tiny bit of blue in here. But these are the stamen, a ton of them, and then there is a female in the center, and it's hard to visualize in this particular picture, but there are a whole bunch of stamen there. So now let's look at a geranium. This is Geranium richardsonii, which they're generally white. This one is a little bit on the pinkish side, but it's Geraniaceae is the family. Geranium, there's several. There's this viscocissimum that's a really pink. And there's another one that's really pink. The interesting thing about geraniums, though, is obviously they're nectar guides here, these lines that are really taking the pollinator right in. But this one, what do you think? When you see this, there are 5 little portions. There's 5 here. And this one, it looks like it's a newer plant. It's a little more pink. These are more white, but it looks like there are 5 little portions here. So would you guess that this is a female or a male? These right here. Let's see if anybody has an idea here. Okay, I do see another another question here, and this is what we're leading into. Do we know roughly what percentage of angiosperms are perfect? I do not know a percentage, but it's not a very, I think it's a majority, but it's not like 80-90%. A lot of plants are perfect, but the interesting thing is that sometimes, and that's what I was getting to with the geranium, is that sometimes geraniums are pistillate, and that these guys this is the female. So they are, this one is a female, meaning another geranium is going to have to be staminate. It's going to have the male portion, and then the pollinator will get to that one and have pollen on it. You've all seen bees that have a lot of yellow on their, a lot of times on their, they have a little basket sort of situation. It's not a basket, but they call it a pollen basket on their legs where the pollen sticks. And so then they come over to the female and the pollen is rubbed off. But anyway, some geraniums are perfect flowers, some are staminate, and some are pistillate, just to confuse us. So that's what I mean when I said early on, and this applies to so many things. There are lots of exceptions. So you can't say that just because you see one perfect geranium that they're all perfect. It doesn't happen in as many flowers, but geraniums tend to kind of fool us, because sometimes, like these three look pistillate. They're female. There is not a male here, but you will find geraniums that are perfect. You will find them that are basically not perfect, and they are they're going to have either pistillate or staminate flowers. So that's not an exact answer to what you want to know, but I don't even know if there's any research being done in that regard. I know there's a lot of research being done that basically tells us things about how plants are changing in terms of climate change and those sorts of things. But this, I think, is just, it's a matter of chance whether they're going to be male or female. Now these would produce, if they have the male pollen on them, they would produce a fertilized seed. So I would think that they could produce either pistillate, staminate, or perfect flowers. I don't know. The one person to ask about that would be Jennifer Eckerfield. I know she's not doing research in that. She's doing a lot of researches on thistles. She's doing quite a bit of things on that. So, all right, so let's check out some more blooms and see what else we notice. And then let's do one more slide, and then we'll do a little bit of a break, okay? So now we get into some sort of funny ones. Here we have a flower. This is a sandwort. This is a Caryophyllaceae. It's a Findler sandwort, and this is in the pink family. It doesn't mean that all flowers are pink, but it's in the pink family, Caryophyllaceae. We have obviously 5 petals. We have 5 stamen, and we have it looks to me like 4 pistils. So it's unusual. Usually we have more frequently, we have 1 pistil in the center, but in roses, we have many pistils and many stamen. So this particular one, no, I'm sorry. Let me take that back. There's 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5 pistils and there's 5 stamen. So that one is a little bit different. So like I say, once you think you've got it down, then you're going to see something different. And also this This is our flower, our bud, like our egg, right? The plant is the baby plant is being made inside there. But they're a little bit different because they're sort of black and white, aren't they? And when these open, I'm sorry I didn't get a picture of the underside, but you can see here that this is one of the sepals, and they're a little bit black and there's a little bit of white. There's this black and white on them. So it's kind of cute. It's very different. This one, this is one of the flowers that is blooming now as we speak. It's out there. This is one of the early ones, and it's aptly named Spring Beauty. So this is a lovely, lovely common name. There may be some other common names for it, but Spring Beauty fits really well. It is, oh, this is wrong. This is a new family. It used to be in the Portulaceae family. And now one of the reasons that the family has changed is because of scientific discoveries. And I will go into that immediately when we come back from our break. But so it's Montiaceae is the current name for the family, but the genus and species have stayed the same. It's Claytonia rosea. There's also a Claytonia lanceolata. And this one, though, is a little bit different. Let's just look at this real quick. There's 5 petals, right? And there's also 5 stamen, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's 1 female. And it shows up a little bit better in this picture. These are tiny, tiny plants. So, and I understand this one is a little bit out of focus. This was in better focus, but this one happens to show the female better. So here's their pistil. Looks like there's 3 little portions here on the stigma. So there is more than likely 3 possibilities of for seeds in the bottom. But the thing I wanted you to see here is that on our calyx, this one is all closed, but there are only 2 sepals. So usually there'd be 5 sepals, and for some reason this one didn't feel like doing 5, so they've only got 2. So usually when you have 5 petals, you have 5 sepals, and you usually also have, or very frequently anyway, have 5 stamen. But this particular one had the 5 petals, 5 stamen, but 2 sepals. So it's still 1 calyx. So, okay, why don't we take, let's do a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and I'll tell you just a little bit about the science and why this name and a couple of other names have changed, okay? All right, so 10 minutes. And if you have questions, you can put them in as well. Okay. Okay, is everybody back and refreshed? I can't tell. Dawn, do you think they're back? Okay. All right, great. Let's go ahead and go. All right, so basically, we talk about this a little more on Thursday with the plant family group, but what botanists had done up until about the late, mostly up until about the late 90s, was rely a lot on morphology, its form of plants, just how they looked, and as well as function. And obviously there was also some microbiology involved in it as well. But in the late 90s, the science called the APG science started in the late 90s. And what APG stands for is angiosperm phylogeny. And what it is, it's a big sounding bunch of words, but basically what it boils down to is science had the ability then to look at the DNA, at the gene level of plants. It's just like, it's the same thing as now they've done our genome. So they've done human genomes or working on, still working on that rather. And that's opened up a very big world of more information. So the APG studies began in, I believe it was 1998. Different groups of scientists around the world are working on that. You can actually Google angiosperm phylogeny group. So it's angiosperm, and then phylogeny means another. It's in the phylums are in the plant family. It's one of the portions that I basically left out just to simplify a bit, but it's another segment of the plant family. But they're looking at the DNA basis of plants, and in doing that, and they're also tracing back at the same time, they're tracing back plants to their evolutionary beginnings. So that has changed some, not all, but it has changed some of the families. The big one that changed, and for you gardeners out there, this was a big one, Scrophulariaceae. We've always put, for instance, the penstemons in the Scrophulariaceae family, which is the figwort family. So that was one of the very first ones that changed. They did feel that the scroff family was big and really encompassed a lot of different plants that truly didn't belong there. So on the basis of DNA and genetic evidence, the penstemons, for instance, have been put into the plantain family. It's Plantagenaceae family. And a lot of the others that were in almost everything actually that was in the the Scrophulariaceae figwort family has moved. The Claytonia rosea, the one that we're looking at on our screen right now, there is still a Portulaca family, but this particular family has gone into the Montiaceae family. And I am sorry, that's my neglect to change that. I did go through this, but I think in my mind, I saw the right thing. So but it's a good thing to bring it up, because the idea is that now science is able to look more deeply into our DNA, our genetics, as well as into the plants. So there have now been at least 4 iterations, 4 different major sections of the angiosperm phylogeny group science. The book that you all have now, or most of you have, the Jennifer Ackerfield's Flora of Colorado, is based on the APG4. So that one came out in must have been about 2014. They are still working. They're still not done. Actually, I asked Jennifer Ackerfield one time when they would be done with the APG, and she laughed. That was her response. So in other words, it's ongoing, but genetics and DNA research takes a long time. And there will, they do say that there will possibly be some more changes in terms of families, but in general, they have not really changed the genus and species names that much, if at all. So it's the family basis that occasionally has changed. And this idea of them not only looking at DNA, but also going back to the evolutionary beginnings has also made some other changes. I want you to meet this is my assistant. She knows more than I do. But anyway, all right, so let's go ahead and continue. All right, so what in the world are we looking at here? This is a plant that is very, very surprising. And this is a fairly large plant. It's herbaceous. It's probably, I don't know, around a good 2 feet tall and a lot of leaves. But what are we looking at here and what are we looking at here? It's the same plant. This is one that is very surprising. It's actually very beautiful. This one is I think really pretty. This one, not as much. But anyway, this is meadow rue, Thalictrum findleri, Thalictraceae. And these, as you might just guess here, that these are the stamen, and they are. There are absolutely no petals. No petals. There's not a petal to be seen. This is the calyx. Well, this is a sepal. So this is a calyx. If you look back here, there's one that's not quite open. So there are 5 calyx, but there's not there's just nothing that resembles a petal at all. And this whole structure right here is about 1/4 of an inch, maybe maybe slightly longer, but not very much. They're really very pretty. I think these look kind of like a chandelier, but the idea is that, wow, no petal. And why does a plant need petals? They usually attract the pollinators. So there's no petals. This one over here is the same plant, very same plant. This is the female. This is the staminate plant. This is the pistillate plant. So the fancy name for this is that they're dioecious. So in other words, there are 2 different plants. There's one female plant, there's one male plant. So you'll see these usually in kind of a grove. As a matter of fact, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times they'll be growing under aspen. And you'll think the leaves look somewhat similar, fairly similar to aspen, or I'm sorry, to columbine leaves. And so you'll think, oh boy, there's a whole bunch of columbines. Usually you will see sometimes a whole bunch of columbines, but this is these little plants here, and you'll see these little fluffy things. These are the females. These are even smaller than the males, and it just looks like a cluster of stuff. I mean, this whole thing here would be probably not too much more than an inch. So they're tiny. They're very, very tiny, but they are, this is the pistillate plant, staminate plant. So, all right. So how do you think these two get together? How does the pollen get over to the female? What would be your guess? Anybody? Come on, put something in there. Just guess. So wind. Yep, absolutely. Deborah has got it. Yes, it is wind pollinated. Yeah. So the majority of plants are, the majority of angiosperms, the flowering plants, are pollinated by various insects, bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, but these are wind pollinated. Now, it'd be interesting, and I don't know the answer to this, I wish I did, but it'd be interesting to know if these plants maybe are a little more ancient in their lineage, because way back 300 or excuse me, around 300 million years ago, when the gymnosperms, the naked seed conifers were around, and that they were the flowering plants weren't around yet, there were also not pollinators. The pollinators essentially evolved very similarly to when the flowering plants evolved. So it would be just curious to know that if maybe these were possibly some of the first flowering plants. I have no idea if that's true. It's just something that I think is interesting to speculate about. So they're wind pollinated. They're very pretty plants, and these, like I say, are very pretty. These I think are not. They just look like just little fluffs of stuff. I think the males have got it in the prettiness form on these. So grasses. Grasses are also, they also flower. They have teeny tiny flowers, but the family is Poaceae. In fact, as you all know, when you hike anywhere and you look at a native undisturbed landscape, a large portion of that is going to be grass. Grasses are hugely important in the ecology of everywhere. Grasses cover an enormous amount of landscape on Earth. And I mean, we're talking a little bit different than lawns here. We're talking about the larger grasses that grow, and they're a very important part of the ecology. We don't think of them as pretty, but they really are. This one happens to be our state grass, and it's got a wonderful, wonderful common name. There's a couple of different names, but eyelash grass. I mean, how good, whoever thought about that, or whoever thought up that one it's absolutely perfect. So the family is Poaceae. So here's a family you all know. You guys, you already know several families just automatically. You would know some of the rose family, the grass family, the sunflower family, at least some of it. And so the grass family, this is the flowering portion. This is early on. Let's see, this one right here shows a little bit of yellow, but each one of these little tiny, excuse me, the little tiny green segments here is a whole flowering spikelet. And it has a whole different segment of terminology involved in it. They're called spikelets, and then there are limas and glooms and all these things. But the thing to remember, excuse me, I don't have a cold, I just have a cough. Anyway, is that they do flower. They have a very, very minuscule little flower. And I want to show you this real quick here, a spikelet of a grass. And we're talking, I don't know, many, many times enlarged. But the very, very often, the stamen and pistil is in one, it's fused, it's in one form. But this would be, okay, so just take this and put it down, way down here. It's, I mean, it's, the whole thing is a lot smaller than this portion. So we're talking minuscule. But you have an outer portion, the lima and the glume, and then you have the inner portion, the palea and the lima. And then right inside, though, you have a flower, a tiny, tiny little flower. And obviously, these are wind pollinated. We all know this, especially those of you guys who have any kind of hay fever. These are the worst, is because the pollen is so small, so that it can be breathed into your respiratory system and sometimes cause a problem. But let's look back at this one for a second. This is the only grass that I'm going to show you today. But as I said before, this is our state grass, Colorado state grass. It's reasonably common. It's a clump grass. So grasses are either clump grasses or rhizotomous, are the two kind of basic. The rhizotomous one, it would be like your lawn. Your Poa pratense is your Kentucky bluegrass. And the reason that you have a lawn, a whole something soft to walk on, is because you have the rhizomes underground that connect everything together. So in a clump grass, you just have basically that. You have a clump of grass. They don't connect underground to another portion of grass. So there is some empty ground in between. So this particular one is a clump grass. It's Poaceae is the family, Chondrosum gracile. Chondrosum is the genus and gracile is the species. This is the grass right before it the pollen comes out. So there's there'll be a whole bunch of little yellow pieces here, and then they fly away very soon. So they pollinate each other and then form seeds. This is the shaft. The seeds are already gone, but so in the winter they tend to persist a lot during the winter, and they also they just dry up and they curve around a little bit. So this is where we get the eyelash. They both kind of look like they could be eyelashes, although most of us don't have green eyelashes actually. But I think eyelash grass is a absolutely wonderful common name. The other common name is blue grama. You can get this one at the nursery. There is a cultivar called Blonde Ambition, which is wonderful. I've got, I think, about 5 of them in my garden. They're very pretty. They're just really nice. Grasses in general grow really long, deep, very, very deep roots. So they stabilize the soil. They have a lot of different functions. But the other thing about grasses to remember is I got a whole book on grasses, and it goes into depth on them. But one of the very first things it says on almost page 1 is that to identify a grass for sure, you need a microscope. So that kind of lets you off the hook on some of these, except that on, like, this grass, for instance, is very distinct. So you can tell, and there's turkey foot grass that looks a little bit like it's got 3-part like a turkey's foot. So there are different grasses that you can identify by their form, but definitively a microscope, because the parts are so small. So, okay, all right, so now we're going to just look at some different things. Look at this. This is kind of a mess here, isn't it? This is Virgin's bower. This is a native plant. It's in the buttercup family, Ranunculaceae. So that's the same family as columbine. And obviously these are very different than columbines. But look, if you're trying to identify this plant, here you have 5 petals. Here you have 4. Here you have 6. Huh. So this doesn't usually happen quite this bad, but the idea is that when you're identifying a plant and when you're getting ready to key a plant, in other words, to go through the brick that is Ackerfield that we carry in the field. I call it a brick because it's very heavy. It's got a lot of good stuff in it. But anyway, when you're going to key a plant and you look at this one, you're like, okay, how many petals does this thing really have? Because it does vary, and that would be mentioned in this one. That would be mentioned in the key. This is Clematis ligusticifolia, so Virgin's bower vine. You can see this in the foothills. It just covers trees. It becomes a very, very big vine. But just to point out that there are always differences. And for instance, when you have the rose family, generally is 5 petals and many stamen, and then the female in the center. But there are exceptions. There are some roses that don't have any petals. So, but a flower, a scientific definition of a flower is the reproductive parts. So in order for something to be called a flower, it either has to have the stamen, it has to have pistils, or it has to have both. That's what's important. The petals are very nice, and they do bring in the pollinators, but they are not really, they're dressing. They're just like us wearing clothes to make ourselves attractive. It's not a crucial thing. So now this one over here is a wild onion. This one happens to be Allium textile. It's Alliaceae or Liliaceae. It has sometimes been in the lily family. Now they do, Ackerfield does use Alliaceae, so that's the one that we're going with now. But it does have 6 petals. So here's another thing that we haven't talked about before. Very often when there are 6 petals, there are 3 here. If you look at these are the ones that are on the inside, and these are outside. Can you see there? So when you have this, when you have like back to your egg, when you have your calyx, very often in these 6-petaled plants, you have the same color petals as sepals. And then just because botanists like to throw in a whole bunch of different terms, we have a different term, which is tepals. So when the sepals here, these 3, and the petals here, when they're the same, they can all be called tepals. So just one other thing to throw in there. And this one does have, this one there, I know this is very fuzzy. We can, oh gosh, and it's a little bit hard to say, to tell, but they do have 6 stamen. Now, also here, you can see this is a new one, this is a new one. So the pollen is actually red. And then these are the ones that have already lost all their pollen. So this is just a little bitty thing. These are bigger structures. These are the stamen that are still producing pollen. So, okay. Where are we? Now we'll go through just a couple of families and talk a little bit about just basically a few other things. When we talk about the mustards, that's a really common family. There are a lot of mustards. Mustards tend to be one family that blooms early, goes to seed really quickly. So very, very frequently you have flowers and seeds on the same plant. And it's very helpful to identify them. But when you look closely at uh, uh, a mustard, for one thing, you have 4 petals, and they don't mess around. They always do have 4 petals. So there's no 5, 6, 7 type of thing. There's 4 petals, but there are 6 stamen, 4 long and 2 short. So you can see here 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and then if I know it's a little bit blurry, but there are 2 here, and there is a female that is not showing here. It is showing right here. There's a female. So these are perfect flowers. And going back to that question that was earlier, which is a really good question. A majority, but I think it's a small majority of plants are perfect flowers. So they have both male and female, but certainly not all of them. But mustards tend to be perfect flowers. But one little aside that I always have to point out, because I think it's kind of funny, botanists tend to use their terminology very freely. There's a lot of different terminology, a lot of different things that they use. And Jennifer Ackerfield told us when she was first producing this book, she said one of her goals is to make things simpler. So here's the funny part. When she, in her Brassicaceae, her mustards, she calls this, and this is a botanical term, but instead of saying there are 2 long and 4 long and 2 short stamen, she calls it tetradynamis. So you might think that's an easy term. I think it's a very long term, but it's one that you'll remember because what it says to me is that botanists, they are so used to their terminology that to them it is simple because they use it all the time. To us, it's not totally that simple, but still, it's just a funny one, and I guarantee that most people remember tetradynamis because it doesn't take any more length in the book to say 2 long or 4 long, 2 short than it does to say tetradynamis. But you just have to say, okay, botanists are used to their terminology. So this particular plant that we're looking at does have 4 petals. I understand that the picture that I took only shows probably this one here, where you can really definitely see that there's 4. This is a different plant over here. But you can see that there are 4 petals very easily. They're in a cross. They used to call these cruciferaceae because they're in a cross, a crucifix. So the family is Brassicaceae, genus is Phaseria for this particular one, species is Vitulifera, and the common name is double bladderpod. And these are sort of violin-shaped leaves. So these leaves help you to drill in on the fact that we're looking at a Phaseria. They're different. They're probably at least 4 to 5 different Phaseria in Colorado. I think there might be more than that. And so the leaves vary a little bit, but they're all like this. They're very grayish green looking, and that comes from their leaves. They have whitish sort of leaves, but the shape really does help very often in identifying plants. If you have 2 that are very similar, whether you're talking about Phaserias and mustards, or whether you're talking about penstemons, which we're going to see next, if you look at the leaves, that'll help you to identify exactly which one you're looking at. So moving on to a penstemon. And as we already talked about, the penstemons have now moved from the Scrofulariaceae, which they were in for years and years, to Plantagenaceae. And the picture child for Plantagenaceae is this little sort of a weedy looking thing. It doesn't look anything like a penstemon. But again, the scientists are looking at DNA. to get these to family. So that's that basically. So penstemon, I know most of you are familiar with penstemon, very possibly from your gardens or from seeing them in someone else's garden. They are another bell-shaped flower. And you see here, you can see just a little bit on here and a little bit over here. This is your calyx. Now, these are not open yet, but they haven't opened into the entire tube, but the calyx is open. This one is the same way. This one, there's your calyx here and here. And they stay on the plant when they open. It's just like a little, they become like a little cup kind of thing. But this one, I know that you can't see it really closely, but this one is almost closed up. So it's still, it's a 5-part calyx made up of 5 sepals. And it hangs on when the plant opens up and opens up into this gorgeous bell tube shape. But it is 5 petals because it's 5 petals fused. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they're fused together. And you also have, so if you look at the word penstemon, penta means 5. So penstamen is 5 stamen. So it's really nice that in this particular genus, they are telling us how many stamen there are. And this shows here, there's 1, and then there's 2, 3, 4. There are 4 stamen at the top, and there's 1 at the bottom. And for some reason, I don't know why, but it's very common for penstemon to have 4 stamen at the top. These are fertile, so they produce the pollen. And then this one at the bottom is generally very, very frequently is sterile. This one is, you can tell it's white. It doesn't have the anther on it. So it's not producing any stamen. Also, a lot of penstemon will have a lot of hair on this bottom stamen. And now I'm not even thinking of the name that they're calling the other name for penstemon. Somebody will think of it. Lisa or Dawn. It's got hair in the name, or it's because of this hairy. And for some reason that word is escaping me.
I can't think of it either, but
okay.
if I can, I'll put it in the chat box.
Come up with that name. Let's look at the unfortunately, I don't have, this picture I took does not have the leaves in it. But this one does. This is Penstemon secundiflorus, and that means side bells is a common name. What it means is that the penstemon are on one side. So unfortunately, a lot of the penstemon, not all, but a lot of the penstemon have their blossoms on one side. So it's not terribly unusual. So, but one thing that will really tell you that you have Penstemon secundiflorus is the leaves. And these leaves are oval, but they're also clasping the stem. See here, they're right on the stem. There's no pedestal, no little bitty stalk attaching them. They're hugging the stem, which is called sessile. And the other thing is penstemon have opposite leaves, so they're right next to each other. Now, so this one is more than likely Penstemon virgatus, and they have, and I'm sorry I didn't get this picture with them. They have the leaves are right across from each other, but they're lanceolate. They're very skinny and longer leaves. So the leaf, a lot of times, we're always glommed into looking at the flowers because they're the pretty part, and they truly are. But the leaves give us a lot of information as well about the flower. So let's see, do we have a question here? Let's look. Beard tongue, thank you, thank you. I don't know why I couldn't remember that. I knew you guys would remember. Okay, all right. And yes, ants are very, very commonly on a lot of plants. Sometimes the ants, they actually harvest the, it's actually the poop from aphids. And they basically protect the aphids so that they use that I can't even think of the really nice name, but it's the poop that comes from the aphids. So we have a different family here, and also a different type of leaf and a different type of flower. So this goes into the gooseberry family, Grossulariaceae, or gooseberry family. An interesting thing there is it doesn't have anything at all to do with geese, nothing. It is this family comes from the word gros, G-R-O-S, which is French for, I believe it's big berry. So somehow or other, people sort of kept saying that word until they got gooseberry instead of Grossulariaceae. So it's just not, it's not about geese. So the genus is Ribes, and this particular species is Cerium, and I should have that non-capitalized here. The common name is wax currant, and it is a shrub. So this is the very same plant in May when it's blooming. It blooms really early, might be blooming soon. It's a little bit early, but it'll be blooming within a couple of weeks. If any of you guys are taking a course in May, either at Roxborough or out at Cherokee, these will definitely be blooming then. But then by summer, and definitely by September, you will have, for one thing, they'll be a little drier. The whole plant will be a little drier, but you'll have these berries. And the berries taste, I don't know, I did taste them once. They taste a little bit like apple for some reason. I'm not sure quite why. Some gooseberries are really tasty. These are like not fantastic, but the birds do like them. Bears eat them. A lot of different creatures eat them. But let's look at the leaves for a minute first. These leaves are palmately veined, and also palmately lobed. So if you look at your hand, so it started at the base of your hand and your fingers spread out, right? That's basically palmate. So the veins go out from here. They start here and go out. And so they have, this particular one has like one, it's basically 3 lobes, and this one is kind of divided a little bit into 2, but it's like 3 major lobes. But it's all one leaf. So this is a really good example of a palmate leaf. This one is obviously the same leaf. It's just that they're, some of them are a little bit drier. They've been through the whole summer and stuff. So the other thing, though, that the reason they're called wax currant is because these leaves, actually you can see on this one, and this isn't particularly close up, but that you can see these little dots. These are little they're little substances that secrete a waxy like substance. So when you touch these leaves, they will be a little bit sticky. And this actually, you'll see these, most of the time you're going to see these shrubs when they neither have the flowers, because the flowers bloom really, really early and then go away and work on becoming the berries. And then, but the berries don't really show up until later. So when you're hiking in, say, June and July, depending on the elevation, if you're up higher elevation, you'll probably see some of the blooms. In fact, you'll see some different ones. If you're up at really high elevation, you'll see Ribes montageum, which has a even bigger bloom, and it because spring is later up there, you might see that one in bloom, and then the berries are different, and they bloom probably by August up in the This is in the subalpine. So, but these guys, this is one shrub that you will see in a lot of places, from about 6 to at least 8,000 feet, a little bit higher than 8, probably even up into 9,000 feet. And so if you see it without these cute little blooms, you feel the leaf. There are two things to do when you see any shrub. You want to see if it's armed, first of all, if it has prickles, shrubs, or prickles, thorns, or I always forget the third one. There are three things. I have it in my book that I teach from. But if you have any kind of a stickery kind of thing, and these will be on your branches, just be careful when you touch it. This one is not armed, so you can look carefully, and then you can touch the branch here, and so it's not armed. So that'll tell you one thing. That'll point you toward this one, and then feel the leaves. And if they're a little bit sticky, that's going to point you to Ribes cerium, the wax currant. Now let's pay a little bit of attention to our bloom. The bloom, actually, it's a little tiny thing. The whole bloom is, half an inch, maybe a little bit more, maybe half an inch going toward 3/4 of an inch possibly. But they're very slender. They're pink. They're really cute. And they're 5 there. You can see 3 here, but if you go all the way around, you have 5 petals. It's 5 petals fused into a tube, and then you have the it's actually, I'm sorry, you do have the 5 petals, and then the white is another substance that's inside. It's not a reproductive substance, but the reproductive structures are inside this little tube. This is your calyx right here, formed with your sepals. And I am sorry, I'm not sure. I believe that they have 2 sepals, but I'm sorry, I don't remember for sure if it's 2 or 5 sepals on these guys. So, but anytime you see a shrub, start out with, are they armed? Any shrub, do that. Even like for your roses. Your roses are armed. The actual roses are armed. Okay, so let's go really quickly here through a couple of things about leaves. When you have a leaf, if you have this is a simple leaf. It's just an oval simple leaf. It's a veined leaf. It's got a little petiole, a little tiny stem that attaches it to the main stem, and then your next leaf is going to start here with an axillary bud. Sometimes you have a leaf that's right on the stem, like that the sidebell's penstemon that we looked at a little bit ago. So this leaf doesn't have a petiole; it's right on the stem. It's called sessile. It just means that there's no petiole, so it's right on the stem. And then sometimes you have leaflets. All these leaflets together makes one leaf. So you'll see that it's easier to see when you get out in the field and see that. If you're hiking now, you can look for these types of things, and also look back on page. I think it's 792. Wait a minute. Let me make sure that's right. Nope, it's not 792. Let me get you the page in Ackerfield that shows you the leaf structures. So if you happen to be hiking and carrying this book, oh shoot, I am having trouble finding it. 782. It's page 782 in Ackerfield. That's where their drawings of the different leaves. That's where the parts of the flower are, and there's a whole bunch of information. So when you take a course, one of the first things we're going to do for you is is show you all the different things that are in acar field. If you have your acar field and it's brand new, it's never been opened, try and look through it. I mean, it's not a book you're going to read, obviously, but look through it to see the various things that she has in there. She has a small glossary. It's not real comprehensive, but there are also in the middle section, there's a whole bunch of pictures. So when you key a plant and it shows you a plate number, it's going to show you a picture either of the plant or sometimes of the seed. So acar field is very, very useful. So we'll learn a lot more about using that book when we're out in the field. So in terms of leaves, again, what we just kind of went through was the idea of the leaf, the simple leaf and the petiole. Some plants have a stipule. Roses have this. It's a leaf. It's like a little bitty leaf structure, and it's attached to the stem. Now this one is interesting because it almost, some of these are across from each other. They're opposite, and some are alternate. So it's not all that easy when you get out in the field and you're looking at an actual live plant to tell. Some plants almost look like, in fact, the bottom leaves can be opposite, and then going up the stem, they can be alternate. This is a palmately lobed and veined leaf right here. So this is one, all of these are leaflets in this particular instance, and this is leaflet of 5 leaflets and 1 whole leaf. So there are a ton of different leaves. When you get down to a pine cone, those are actually bracts that are on the leaf. A juniper is a little bit different though. Juniper, this is the scales are actually leaves, but it's a lot easier when you see this out in the field. The other thing that you want to look at for leaves is leaf arrangement. And like I said, these show it really simply. When you look at a plant in the field, some of it is when they're whorled, it's pretty simple to see. Otherwise, you can have a combination of alternate and opposite leaves. So it's not as easy to see. So the other thing that we're going to talk about just fairly briefly is monocots and dicots. This is kind of interesting because Jennifer Ackerfield does not mention either term in her book, in all of her book. This was very prominent in previous floras, like the one in Colorado, we had Dr. William Weber, who did use monocots and dicots. This has changed somewhat. Some botanists do very much still use the monocot, and it's actually eudicot term, and we'll talk about that in a second. But that is changing a bit again because of the APG, the DNA and genetics. So, but I want to show you some of the ideas behind the monocot and eudicot term. Now, I didn't even, let's see, let's just go to this one first. So monocots and dicots are the terms that were very prominent. All it means is the whole term is monocotyledon. A cotyledon is the baby leaf of a plant. So when that seed first opens, you're not going to have a flower. You're going to have either 1 or 2 baby leaves. And sometimes they can be formed differently than the mature leaves are going to be formed. So when you have a grass, grass is a monocot. When that seed opens, a seed for grass, you're going to have 1 long, eventually long and skinny and parallel veined leaf. So that's a monocot. Now dicots, now with the new genetics, they're calling them eudicots, which this EU means true dicots. And they're getting, in drilling back to some of the evolutionary thing, That's why they're getting a little mixed up with what they're really all calling dicots. So it's getting a little bit changeable, and there's going to be some more information coming down the pike. But I wanted you to know that still, even now, excuse me, the plants don't care what we call them. They don't care if we call them a monocot or a eudicot or a dicot, right? They're plants and they're doing their thing like they've always done. They've been around a lot longer than we have. So it's our terminology. It doesn't mean that the plants themselves are changing, right? So the plants still, the monocot type plants still have one baby leaf, which is called a cotyledon. Cotyledon is just a term, fancy term for a little baby leaf, the very first leaf that comes out of a seed. And they're grass-like and they're parallel veined. Dicots, now they're wanting us to go more toward eudicot, is almost all, oh, excuse me, I'm losing my voice, almost always net veined. So let's see, let's look at, I'm going to jump ahead to show you the net veined is, there's a parallel vein here, but then the other veins go off all over the place. That's net veined, okay? All right, so let's go back to this again. So when we have a monocot, the flowers are usually in 3 or 6 parts. So 3 or 6 petals and sepals. We went back to that tepal term, which is generally when we have 6 petals, very frequently, not always, but very frequently we have tepals. Dicots are the flowers that have generally either 4 or 5 petals, and they generally have either 4 or 5 sepals. So like our mustards have 4 petals, 4 sepals. Our roses, for instance, generally have 5 petals, 5 sepals in their calyx. Excuse me, goodness. Okay, so let's look back at this one. This one here has a very distinct 3 petals, and these 3 guys right here are the sepals, and that this is forming the calyx. And if you count this is it's a perfect or complete flower. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stamen, and there's one little girl. So her stigma is right here at the top. It's a 3-part. And if you look down here, you're seeing the ovary. It's not, it's down at the base of the plant. It's a little bit out of focus because the main focus was on the top portion of the plant. But you have parts in 3s or 6s. So this would be a monocot. Although, like I say, Jennifer Ackerfield is one of the botanists, and they seem to be fairly divided now on not using those terms, even though the plants still, they're still 3 and 6 part. So I think it's a little bit good to know that this is still the way these plants grow. Now the yellow that's all around here is not a reproductive part. It's similar to a nectar guide. So it's something that's calling to the pollinators. Come here, come here. I'm going to give you some nectar. So the nectar will be way down here at the base. So this one, so we got 3 petals over here. Here we have 5 petals. We're back to the geranium. This one, by the way, is a Calahortus gunnissonii. It's a common name is a sago lily. They're gorgeous. They bloom around here. I live out by Roxborough. They'll be blooming out here in end of May, maybe early June, something like that. This one is a geranium. This is the geranium richardsonii. And oh, I'm sorry, this one family is Liliaceae family. So this one is geranium family, Geraniaceae, and it's geranium. Geranium is the genus, and the species is Richardsonii. I think they were probably named by a Richard, but that I'm not sure. It must have been. But we have 5 petals. And if you look back in here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sepals. And there are, this one is contrary. Geraniums are just little different ones. This is a, remember the other ones we saw were pistillate geraniums, right? This one is perfect. It's a complete flower. It's got the female in the center, and it's got, I think it's 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No, it's 10. 8, 9, 10. 10 stamen. So this one doesn't play by the rules of, you know, having 5 stamen. So again, it's back to expect, you know, expect unusual things. So you have your, usually have the same number of petals and stamen and sepals, but not always. So here is the one that we just saw, the sago lily, and here is the Richardsonii. All right, so what do we have here? We have 5 petals over here, right? And we have the girl in the center, and we have, oh gosh, a whole bunch of guys surrounding it. This is a really cool little gentian that grows up in the subalpine and alpine, Sfortia perennis. It's in the gentian family. It's star gentian is common name, and it's Gentianaceae. This little plant it's actually a deeper blue than this. It's really deep. You can see here, this is the calyx. Look at how deep that is. Very, very deep blue. And this is the sepals right here that have opened up. So this one, the whole plant is about, oh, maybe a little over an inch, possibly an inch and a half at most. So it's pretty small. This one, we have 6 petals. There are, again, it's very easy to see. There's 3 that are inside and 3 that are outside. So that these 3 were actually forming the calyx when this plant was inside or when it was in its formation. So we would call these tepals, right? So, and you have, it looks to me like this is a pistillate flower because, well, actually, you know, I'm not really sure here because it looks like if this is the pistil, it's full of stamen. So, I mean, it's full of pollen, I'm sorry. You know what? I'm not absolutely positive on this one. It definitely is, there's a lot of stamen, so, or a lot of pollen, excuse me. So I would, and this is a guess, but I would guess that this is probably a staminate flower. And it's there is not a unless it's just one pistil and a whole bunch of stamen is landed on it. That doesn't seem likely. Seems to me like this, we're looking at a staminate flower here. This one we can tell pretty easily. This is death camas, which also clues you into the fact that this one is poisonous, although it's not nearly as poisonous as the species of this one that lives in the east. So again, the one that lives in the east, and I don't know the exact name of that one, it's in the same family, Melanthiaceae. It is probably Zygodensis, but a different species. So this one is the foothills death camas, Zygodensis paniculatus. They say that when the colonists or the pilgrims were coming across the West, they wanted to use onions in their stew. And the foliage looks like onion foliage. It is parallel veined. The flowers are 6 flowered, but would be before they flowered. If they just had the foliage, they would dig these up and use the bulbs with deadly consequences because they are poisonous. But it has six petals and also 6 stamen and one little girl in the middle. The pistil is in the middle. So that is a perfect flower, a perfect little poisonous flower. This is a geranium that you're going to see very frequently. It is an alien. It's a very, very common early bloomer. So this one is the one that I did catch with the typical seed pod. It's called a stork's bill type of seed pod. And by the way, the Geraniaceae is an entirely different plant than the ones that we all grow on our porches. Those are pelargoniums. I'm not sure exactly why they're called geraniums, but they're not in the same family as Geraniaceae. So I guess it's more accurate, I believe, to call them pelargoniums. But these little guys, they have very different foliage than the native geraniums do. I'm not sure where these originate, but they are fairly common as weeds here. They do have 5 petals, 5 sepals, and I am not close enough to tell, but I believe this one is a perfect flower. But the thing I did want you to really notice is the seed pod. The interesting thing, I think I mentioned this early on, is a lot of seeds retain the style. So in other words, this is the female portion. Remember, the pistil has the stigma at the top, then the style, and then the ovary. So when the ovary, so here's the ovary, and here's the style, and what would be the stigma is at the top. So many times when a plant goes to seed, you will have your ovary, your seed, and a lot of times the style stays in some form or another. This one happens to stay in a very long form, and so this one is called the stork's bill because it's such a long thing. But anyway, on a lot of seeds, you have your style will stay in some form or another. So let's see, we have quite a few slides to go through yet. So I'm going to go through as many as we can here. Here is in terms of a plant family, this is one we saw earlier. It's a little bit different picture, but this is the typical rose family. And again, there are exceptions, but a typical rose family is going to have 5 petals, many stamen, and many pistils as well. So we also saw this flower earlier, but we saw it from the back of it. And I didn't show you the foliage. So this is one where obviously the foliage is very, very different from the Rosa Woodsi that I just showed you. This is pinnate foliage. So this is one, these are leaflets. This is one leaf. This whole thing is one leaf. Pinnate foliage very frequently points us to pea family, but in this case, it's a rose family. You can see this one looks like a poster child rose, even though it's yellow. It's 5 petals, many stamen, and then a fair number of pistils in the center. The other thing that we have with roses, and I've shown you this with a florist rose, although they are on these, I just don't have it in a good photograph, is that we have we have all our petals. We have the sepals, and then here's our whole calyx. But underneath we have this cup-shaped thing called a hypanthium. And roses generally do have a hypanthium. There are other flowers that have a hypanthium other than the rose, but roses tend to have that it's more common in roses. So this is in the rose family. And so this is a really good example of a flower, a group of flowers where you have to drill down and look at one flower. So when you look at one flower, I know this is hard to see, but they do have 5 petals. You can see all these fuzzy things. These are the stamen. So when you have, so again, when you look at one flower, you're going to count 5 petals. You're going to see many stamen, and you're going to see the female. In this particular one, it looks like there's one female. These are in the shape of a raceme, and you can see that shape over here when this is a chokecherry, when they are in berries, because you have the stem, and then you have a little pedicle, and then each some of these have already fallen off or been eaten, but you have the stem, and then the pedicle, and then the berry. So here you have a stem, which doesn't show right now because it's so covered. You have a stem, each one has a little petiole, and then the flower. So, and then this particular rose, you have a really nice oval, just a simple leaf, and the petiole goes down here. So this is Rosaceae family. The genus is Patis. The species is Virginiana. Common is chokecherry. These are shrubs. They tend to sucker, and so you get not just one chokecherry, but usually a grove of them. A lot of the rose family are edible, not all of them, but apples are in the rose family, peaches, plums. Like I said, wild plums are out there blooming now, and the bloom, oh my gosh, it smells so good. It's one of my very, very favorite fragrances. But a lot of edibles are in the rose family. So let's look real quick at a violet. The violets are very easy to identify, and there are a lot of different violets. There are at least 3 down in the montane, the lower, the forest, lower forest area, and up into the montane. You get some different ones, but the different species have different leaves. So again, the leaf helps you identify. This is one that's blooming now. It's starting to bloom now. You should be able to see that fairly easily. It's Viola Nuttallii, and this is named by Nuttall, who was one of the early famous botanists. So it doesn't have anything to do with nuts or anything like that, but it is a very common one that you'll see now. And some of the other flowers, like you'll see white violets, and you'll see blue violets, and the leaf shape is very different. So that, as well as the color, will help you to identify. The other thing you'll see is Apiaceae flowers, that family, and it's like an umbel. So it's like an umbrella turned upside down, and many of these have double umbels. So you see all these come off of the start here, and then there's another umbel here. And this one is Ligusticum porteri, or lovage. It's umbel form. Another umbel form is Angelica, which is a huge, huge flower. They bloom somewhere that it's quite moist. They can be at least 4 feet high, 5 feet high. This one was oh, actually, okay, I have to go back. This one, I'm sorry, I'm showing you was a smaller one. There is an Angelica that's very large. This one, Gray's Angelica, is alpine, and it is still a pretty good sized plant, but only about 1.5 feet, about 18 inches high, something like that, which is quite a bit. That's tall for the alpine. But the tall Angelica, and I thought that was the one I had here, but this is the alpine one. But this is a double umbel. So this is a 5-petaled flower. So you have to look really, really close. And you have to use your hand lens probably to see that it is a 5-petal flower. Whereas this one, my photograph is is not drilling in close enough. But again, you want to look at, when you have a clump of flowers, you want to look at one flower and see how many petals you have. Here is one of the mustards. This happens to be an alien, but it's kind of a cute one. It's blue mustard, it's Chorospora tenella, and it's very obvious. I mean, you can see this from 50 yards away. You have 4 petals, and all the sepals are hiding way in there, but I'm sure that this one also has I'm sorry, I said sepals and I meant stamen. It has the 6 stamen, the 4 long and 2 short. Okay, let's look. We have a whole bunch of questions, so let's look at the questions. Prunus, yes, you're right. The APG did. Okay, I have to apologize because I made this. I've used this slideshow for many years, and I thought I had updated everything, but obviously I have. And you're right, I have missed that. So Prunus, yes, you're right. Actually, okay, here's one thing that's interesting is if you know some of the previous, if you learned under Weber and are now transitioning through the APG and are using Ackerfield, which is what we all use now. But if you remember some of the other names, some of the previous names, she will usually give that to you. So sometimes in the index, but when you get to the name, when you've keyed out to the name, she will generally almost always tell you what the name used to be as well. So yeah, but thank you for pointing that out. I do need to go through this and make sure I've updated everybody. Yes, and strawberries, Fragera virginiana is yes, and you're right. It is in the rose family. So next time you see, whether you're growing strawberries or whether you're seeing the wild strawberries, look closely. You'll have your 5 petals and many stamen, and the little females in the middle. So let's see. Okay. Yeah. So for tepals, it's when the petals and the sepals are the same color that they're called tepals. Yeah. They just throw that into, just so long as you understand something, it's like, well, wait a minute, we have to put another thing in there for you. Okay. So specific epithet for your species is specific. So I'm sorry, I'm not understanding that otherwise. When you get down the species, it is the most specific, like every plant that grows in that species should be the same. Yeah. Okay. Did the Lovey picture have white flowers? Yes, they're white. There is another one that is yellowish. There's several Apiaceae that are yellowish. And there are, let's see, I think that's the only Apiaceae I have in this particular slideshow, but there's one that's called whiskbroom parsley, Harborea Trachyplora, I believe is correct for that one. And that one is yellow. It's a short little yellow one. Okay, all right. So let's see. We're supposed to, it's 5 of 12, and we're supposed to stop at noon, I believe. I do have a few more slides, and I am willing to go through them if you'd like. I do want to show you a pea flower for sure. So I'm going to skip around a little bit, and those who want to stay on will go through the rest. But this is a close-up of a pea flower. The pea flowers are really, they're really pretty fascinating. They are 5 petal, but probably not the way you'd think, because this is a banner, 1 banner, 2 and 3 are wings, and then this is called the keel. And it is a 2-part, but it's fused. Now, what happens, which is really cool, is when the pollinator comes to this flower, it lands on the keel and pushes down. The keel opens, and inside are all the goodies, the reproductive parts. Most, not all peas, but most peas have 10 stamen inside, and 9 of them are fused, and then 1 is free, and then there's also a female. Almost all peas are perfect flowers. Why there are 10, I don't know, and why only 9 of them are fused, I don't know. But it is the coolest thing when you can look at a pea. Now, the pea that we will be seeing when you're out in the field is this one. It's the Thermopsis. It's actually Rhombifolia variety, Diveracarpa now. Jennifer Ackerfield has combined 2 of the Thermopsis because they're very similar. But anyway, this one is a big pea. So this is one wing, one banner, 2 wings, and this is the keel. It's big enough that you can put your finger on that keel, or you will see bumblebees on the keel. You can't see what's inside when they're there because they cover the whole thing. But when you take your finger and you very gently press on the keel, it will open up and you will see all the insides. It's just so much fun. I always get a kick out of doing that, no matter how many times I've done it. It's a wonderful thing to be able to show kids, that's where the pollinator goes. And it's just fascinating. And so inside there, way inside, after you open up the keel, the pollinator will brush against, and it's generally a big bee on these, a bumble. They will brush against all the pollen, get that on themselves, and then their tongue will go way down deep inside the keel and get nectar. So that is that. It's wonderful. And then this that almost shows it, but not quite enough. These are trifoliate, so they're 3 leaves. So think about your the weeds, like oh gosh, I've got like the thought was there and the train kind of went past me. Alfalfa would be one thing. Alfalfa is it's an alien plant, but it's growing here as a fodder. Horses eat it, cows eat it, etc. And it has 3 leaves. It's very common to see this one. So there are 3 parts to the leaves. So it's trifoliate, just meaning 3 leaves. Here just shows you one of the bean pods for the Thermopsis. So it looks like a bean pod or a pea pod. Okay, so very quickly here, we're basically at noon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop, ask if there are any more questions, and then if you would like, I will show you there's about 7 or 8 more to go through. So if you want to just forge ahead, we will do that. But in the meantime, does anyone that has to leave have any final questions? I see one maybe. Nope, I guess not. Okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead and go. And if you have to leave, that's okay. But we're going to go back and just show you one more mustard. This is one that you will see very commonly. This is a native called Western Wildflower. It's got 4 petals. And when you'd have to look very closely here, probably with your hand lens, and you would see your 6 stamen, the tetradynamis, okay, and the female, because these are perfect flowers. But it's very easy to see that you have your 4 petals there. So the mustards do not surprise you. There are other flowers that have 4 petals, but the most common with 4 petals is mustard. So the first thing to think of if you see 4 petals is mustard, and then differentiate from there to see, tell yourself why it's not a mustard. So one thing would be if it has 6 stamen, the mustard's the only one that has 6 stamens. So that would be one differentiation. And the leaves would help you to a certain extent too. When you look at these leaves, you can see that they are alternate. These are very clearly alternate. Like I said earlier, it's not always as easy to tell. With these, it's very, very clear that they're alternate. And with mustards, they generally do have alternate leaves. So this again is, we've mentioned the idea of pinnate before. The word pinnate just means feathery. So when you see this type of a leaf structure, these are generally leaflets. So this whole thing is one leaf. The way you can tell that is down below where it attaches to the stem, you would have a bud that would form another leaflet. So this is one whole leaf here. So when they're pinnate or feathery like this, a lot of times it will indicate that you're looking at a pea family, but not always. This is just another close-up of a penstemon that does show you, it shows you 2 things. It shows you the beard tongue, and thank you for whoever mentioned that term. Sometimes when I'm doing a lot of talking, all of a sudden my little brain kind of starts to shut off for me. But you can see here that you have your 4 stamen. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and here is the female, just this top portion of the female, and it's going to go down and back. It's right here. It's a little bit indistinct, but it is there. This is a perfect flower, and you do have your female. The female also shows here. That it doesn't show the stem going all the way down. So there's the 4 stamen, and then this is the furry one that's down on the bottom. In fact, this whole thing, the petals even are furry. So that's why penstemon have gotten another nickname as beard tongue. And so you can see a lot of plants or a lot of ants, and they're trying to. I don't see the aphids on there, but certainly there are aphids, and these guys really they really like the aphids and their poop. So, and it's 5 petals. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fused petals. And this one happens to be in it. These leaves are different. If you remember the leaves that we saw on the other penstemon that we saw a bit earlier, this is Penstemon strictus. It's Rocky Mountain penstemon. It's Plantagenaceae, and used to be in the Scrophulariaceae, but it's Plantagenaceae. But this is a very, very sturdy plant. It is a really good one for your garden. It will take over a little bit, and then they'll even get a little bit woody, and you can cut them back, but they return, and they're very, very hardy. They don't need a whole lot of water, so it's a good sturdy plant and very pretty, and it's a very big flower, so the bumblebees will use this one as well. We haven't talked about mints at all, so I want to mention those just with one slide here. Mints have a square stem. I know you can't see that on here, but if you're growing lavender, or if you see a lavender plant, or if you let's see what else. If you happen to be growing, I call it agastache. I know some people call it agastaceae. The hyssop, the plant that hummingbirds like so much. If you're growing that in your garden, go out and feel the stem. It is a square stem. There are a lot of plants that are square stem. The one thing that's very beneficial out where I live, I have a lot of deer out here, and we can't have fences around our yards. So the deer do not eat generally. I mean, I wouldn't want to 100% guarantee it, but about 90% guarantee they do not eat mints. So if you live in deer territory, try to grow mints, any mints that will grow in your altitude. that will help. I don't know about elk. Elk tend to eat a little more things, but in general. So the other thing about mints, they have a square stem right there that gloms you into almost always dealing with a mint. There are a few exceptions, but mints also have opposite leaves. Sometimes they're whorled, but these particular ones are opposite. But the whorls are the flowers on this particular one here. This is field mint. It is a native, Mentha arvens. Arvens means of the field. It's a Lamiaceae is the name. And so the flowers are right around, they're just going right around the stem. Now, for a close-up of a mint, this little guy, which is a real cutie, you'll be seeing this. If you take a May class, you will probably see this. And it is Scutellaria bretonii, which is skullcap mint. You can get cultivars of this to grow in your garden. And what they've done with cultivars is they've made them so that they bloom more profusely, which is good. The thing to watch out for, if they hybridize a plant or get so many cultivars of it that it no longer produces nectar, then it's no longer good for the pollinators. So that's one thing to be careful of. But if you get, I'm growing a cultivar in my garden, and it's Bretonii, and the variety I don't have on the top of my head right now, but it's a little bit different looking plant than this. It's much fuller, but the flowers look the same. Now these are somewhat similar to penstemon in that they are tubular and they are 5-petal fused. So this is, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The thing that distinguishes a mint flower is that the lower lip, think of it as pouting. The lower lip is bigger. So it's noticeably bigger in all the mint flowers. But these little flowers are probably, I don't know, around half an inch, maybe slightly bigger. So they're really, these guys are very small, but mints are square stem. If you see square stem, that clues you into the possibility. Now, I only have 3 more slides, and they're in regard to sunflowers. So it's really pretty easy to tell if you have a sunflower, right? Because we all know what, like regular sunflowers, which are, this is one, it's Helianthus annuus, is your standard sunflower. And you can buy sunflower seeds for all kinds of cultivars. I know you've seen different ones, they're different colors and variety of differences. But anyway, sunflowers, that's the largest family in the world. There are over 20,000 species in the world. Now, this is what I got from Weber. So I do need to change this a little bit, although this still holds. There are over 300 species in the eastern slope. Dr. Weber did an eastern slope flora and a western slope flora. And Dr. Ackerfield does one for east and west, which is one reason why the book is bigger. But also there are, this is the biggest family in Colorado by far, the sunflower family. Whether you're talking east, west, all of it there's more. So what happens with a sunflower is you have multiple flowers. So we're gonna just talk about that a little bit. So all of these, every single one of these, they're tiny. There's a bunch of them. This is a weed. This is Carduus nutans. And the reason I put it on here is I want to talk about this portion as well as the flowering portion. So the flowers up here, there are a ton of them. I mean, it'd take you forever to count them, but these are flowers. And so with most sunflowers, we have rays, and then inside we have discs. But before we talk about those, I want to talk about what happens to the calyx. Because we have a whole bunch of flowers, sometimes hundreds, many more than you can count. Sometimes they're not as many and you can easily count them. But because there are a whole bunch of flowers all put together, the calyx basically shrunk a whole lot. It's not any of this, this is something different. So each particular flower has a little fuzzy piece that's called a pappus. It's a little tiny bit of hair, and they're very, very small. And you do have to look at those in order to identify the plant. So when you identify a sunflower plant, first you look at the whole thing. You're looking at a whole bunch of plants. You look at this underneath. So since it's not a calyx, it does cover the whole thing when it's forming, but it is called an involucre. And each individual one is called, and they're synonyms, either bracts or filaries. And so they all close up over this plant when it's forming. And when it opens, then this portion here, whether it's like this, these are like shingles. That's not a botanical term. It's just an easy term to kind of remember it. They're shingles. So these guys, see, they're very hairy, and that's a distinguishing feature. But they're like shingles, kind of like shingles on your roof, like they overlap, right? So they can be this way, or they can be another way, which I'll show you in a minute. But all of this is called the involucre, and it closes up over the developing bunch of flowers inside. So this is an involucre, this is an involucre. This one, I can't remember if I told you, this is Carduus nutans. It's a thistle. And it is I think they're from Scotland, I believe. They're definitely alien to here though. And this one is a regular sunflower. This is Helianthus annuus. Annuus is yearly, so they come every year. And it has a lot of, these are rays. So, and this is just an extra little bug here. So let's look at the other side. This is a different flower. This is an arnica, and this one has rays and discs. Now this shows the discs up close. So this one, okay, look at a ray. First of all, just look at this right here. The ray has its own reproductive structure. This is a flower right here, just this ray with its reproductive structure. This is it. Most of these are the male and the female are fused together. Sometimes they're separate, sometimes they're fused together. But this is the flowering structure. This ray is one complete flower. And inside is a disc. These haven't opened up yet. When they do open, there are 5 petals. Let's see if they're okay. This one's easy to count. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals. And this, let's see, where's one that's really easy to see? This is coming out. The structure is just like this, only it's coming. You can see it here. It's a little bit out of focus, but you can see it. I'm going to show you one in a minute where I think they're a little more in focus. But what I want you to see here is that this is one flower. This is going to be one flower. These are all developing in here. But there's a whole bunch of flowers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I think 10 rays on this particular flower, this arnica, and then a whole bunch of disc flowers. So they're all together. So this one has rays and discs. The one that we just showed you, this one is all rays. I'm sorry, excuse me. This is all discs. And this one is rays and discs, although I'm not showing you the discs. This one here is all rays. This is actually a native dandelion. This is Nothocallis cuspidata, which is a native dandelion. It's rays only. But you can see these little things sticking up, right? Each ray has one, and that's the reproductive structure. I'm not sure why they're so long, probably to catch pollinator, to, you know, to have the pollinators come and rub on them. But these are ray only, and your common dandelion, the alien dandelion that we all have, is rays only as well. And we'll be picking those apart in the courses for sure, the common dandelions. And you can look at those with your hand lens. If you have a hand lens now, and you're really good with using it, you have to bring it really close. Pick a dandelion and very, a weedy dandelion, and pick one, just real gently pull out one ray. And then look at that with your hand lens, and you will see a little tiny reproductive structure on it. It's pretty cool. So you also have plants that are disc only. This one was over on the western slope on the way to Crested Butte. So it's in the, I don't know, probably around 7,000 feet, something like that, I think. But this one is Dusty Maiden is the common name, and it actually grew in an area that's real. I mean, you can tell here it's a very dryish area, or pincushion, which is kind of cute. But it's in the Asteraceae family. It is a disc only. There's no rays on this one. Before we get into that, I want you just to look at this is the Onvoluker. Remember I told you the other one, this one, both of these are shingled. They're layered, right? This one, they are like a picket fence. And again, that's not a botanical term. It's just that they're right next to each other in a row, like a fence. So those are the two types of arrangement for this is still called an Onvoluker. Each one is called a bract or a filary. And then we have all the discs here. So this one is really good. We can see the reproductive portion of it here. And on this one, we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 flowers. Okay. And you can see, actually, if you can, see that little tiny bit of yellow here, that's pollen. And so it looks to me like these are both, these are fused, the male and female. So you have your pollen coming out here. So, okay. So do we have any questions about that? That gives you just a little bit of an introduction to the Asteraceae family. The Asteraceae family is the biggest family in Colorado, and it's a little more complicated to key because of all these factors. Excuse me. So there's some little different terms. So that's all I have, unless you have some questions. So, okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So get out there and hike and enjoy the flowers. Look really close and see what parts you can identify. Whoops. Okay. Do we have?
Lenore, there was a couple of questions about variety.
Okay, so a variety is more of a cultivated term. So it goes more with horticulture, growing plants, in other words, or the nursery trade versus there are some varieties in botany as well, but okay, I think Lisa might get into this a little better than I do, but I know that cultivars would be more related to the nursery trade than so a variety. Used in botany, it just tells more about the species. So for instance, when we mentioned, I don't know if you remember the golden banner, this one here. The correct term there now, according to Dr. Achterfield, is Thermopsis rhombifolia, excuse me, variety Diveracarpa, because she's combined the two. It used to be that Thermopsis Diveracarpa and Thermopsis rhombifolia were two separate keys. Now they're essentially together because she feels that they are very close, very, very closely related. They're so closely related that they can be one species. I'm not sure if that totally answers your question. Do you have anything to add, Lisa?
Yeah, so I put an article in the chat box that goes into it a little more in detail. My understanding
that is a kind of a partial answer to your question.
Yeah, my understanding is that a cultivar is intentionally developed, you know, and propagated.
Right. Well, get out there and hike and look around your garden. Go down to botanic gardens and walk around wherever you can go to keep looking at things. Okay. All right.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, Lenore.
Enjoy. Hope to see some of you in some of the courses.